a superstition often stood in place of science, and mental illness was just not understood at all. It was basically just feared or concealed completely, or just blamed on other entities or spirits. So families struggling with psychological disorders just didn't seek therapy. They thought something was wrong with them, and not that something very common was wrong with them, but something like was inside them and wrong with them, if that makes sense. So they would turn to local shamans, or worse, they would just do nothing at all. So the fear of public shame meant that most of these cases were just buried quietly, especially in a small, tightly woven community where reputations quite literally meant survival. And in Amarjit's village, poverty wasn't just a statistic. It was basically just a way of life. So his family lived in a very densely packed neighborhood made of mud brick homes and open drains. His parents would work as laborers, earning barely enough to feed their children. But more dangerous than the poverty here was the silence. Children with any sort of behavioral issues were rarely seen as mentally unwell. They were called troublesome, moody, or simply cursed, like actually they thought they were cursed. And few recognized the warning signs, obviously, given the lack of care. And fewer still had the means to actually act on them. And so when Amarjit began exhibiting troublesome behavior, no one asked questions that should have come first. You know, questions like, what the hell was going on inside Amarjit's mind? What's causing him to act out like this? But instead, like so many other children born into these margins, he was just left to his own world. One that was shaped by suffering, superstition, and silence. And in that silence, something very, very, very dark began to grow. So Amarjit entered the world as another child born into poverty, in a village where survival came way before any sort of psychology. But long before Amarjit ever picked up a brick, which we'll get to, there were signs. First off, he was never liked by other children. He didn't really have any friends. Because in the village, boys his age played together and swam in the pond, and when other children asked him to play, he reportedly would sometimes lash out in sudden bursts of anger at them. So they were like, whoa, okay, shit, dude, you don't have to play Marco Polo with us. Like, I don't know. So villagers would later describe him as strange, but polite, which I find very hard to believe, but also notably withdrawn. He was very to himself. And looking back, these were the early indicators of detachment and harmful potential. And his mother, Parul, noticed the difference too. Amarjit just had this temper and an intensity that she just couldn't explain. She didn't know where it came from. And instead of turning to doctors, she would turn to tradition. She would smear black kajal beneath his eyes to ward off evil, and placed an amulet of protection from the Hanuman temple around his arm. But no amulet could stop what was manifesting inside this evil little child. But obviously, she didn't know any better. She just thought that maybe it was an evil spirit. Maybe that this will help, you know? So it's of no fault of her own. Amarjit would have no formal education as well. There was basically no access to structure, therapy, or any sort of guidance. Some reports even mention neglect from his parents, and it would be around this time that tragedy would first strike. Seemingly out of nowhere, Amarjit's infant cousin would die under suspicious circumstances, and his family would have to make a devastating choice. They would keep quiet. They would call it an accident, and they would shield him. That they are responsible for. That I don't have an excuse for them for. So basically, they were rewarding the behavior of their murdering child, not the best parent, but probably worst parent award, I'd say. So with not punishing your child or not making them be held accountable, the darkness inside him would quickly unfold. So like I said, his first victim was very close to home. It was his younger cousin. And there seems to be a bit of discrepancy from various sources of the age of the victim, but his cousin was an infant. So one day, the infant would seemingly vanish, and shortly thereafter, her body would be found. And it was clear that she had been beaten to death, and there would be no trial, no police reports. Her family, basically Amarjit's family, just chose to stay silent, even though they knew that Amarjit had done the crime. And then, not long after, his infant sister would be his next victim. And his sister would be just 8 months old. And Amarjit would strangle her to death with his bare hands. Like, just horrifying. But again, the family did not report the crime. And whether out of shame, fear, or just pure disbelief, they buried not just their child, but the truth. So in 2007, the village was shaken when a third child would go missing. 6-month-old Khushbu, the daughter of a neighbor. Her mother had left her sleeping at the local school while she just stepped away. But when she returned, the child was completely missing, and no one was prepared for the truth that had actually occurred. So the community gathered around and a search began to break out. But not long after that, Amarjeet would step forward and he would confess. Very casually, even cheerfully. And officers just couldn't believe it. They thought naturally that it was a prank. I mean, this kid is 8 years old. He's a small child. How could he have done this horrible crime? And if he was to do it, maybe it was an accident, but why would he be happy about it? They were just really confused. But that's when he would lead them to the body. Hidden away, her tiny body lay buried in a shallow grave. And the infant had been strangled and bludgeoned to death with a brick. And when questioned by police, Amarjeet reportedly smiled through his entire confession, and he even asked for biscuits at the beginning of it. And as investigators listened, just completely stunned, he described the murder with chilling detachment, just pure psychopathic behavior. He was quoted to say, "She was sleeping in the school. I took her a little away, killed her with a brick, and buried her." Just like absolutely chilling. There's just something about a child with so much detachment that is next level horrifying. So forensic psychologists would be brought in, and their official conclusion would be that Amarjeet was a sadist, a child who found pleasure in inflicting pain. So this was not a prank gone wrong. It was not the product of a playground fight. This was something far, far darker and far rarer. And now the world would finally take notice. A little too late, if you ask me. So when the news broke that an 8-year-old had killed 3 infants, it sent shockwaves across India and the world. But once the horror of his confession settled, authorities were left with the difficult question: what do you do with a killer child? And at the time of Amarjeet's arrest in 2007, India law was very clear. A child under the age of 18 could not be tried as an adult, and there would be no prison sentence, no criminal trial, no possibility of life imprisonment, and certainly no death penalty. So instead, Amarjeet was placed in a juvenile detention facility, the only legal option available at the time. And there, he would spend the next 10 years, the maximum sentence allowed for a minor under Indian law. And behind closed doors, rehabilitation efforts would begin. And reports suggested he received counseling, education, and behavioral therapy. But the truth is, almost nothing is known about what happened inside those walls. There were no updates, 0 interviews, and the file on Amarjeet Seda slowly disappeared from public view. And then, in 2016, he would turn 18 years old. And under Indian law, his record was completely sealed. So with his file closed, his identity was changed to protect his future and prevent vigilante retaliation, which I'm like, don't let that guy out. If he can do that at 8, what the could he do at 18 years old? Now, he's in his mid-20s now? That's terrifying. And today, his current location is completely unknown to the public. Some say he relocated under government protection, but others believe he may have quietly reintegrated into society under a new identity. And what remains is just his horrifically chilling legacy. So Amarjeet Seda is still confirmed the youngest serial killer in modern history. And somewhere, perhaps walking among us, he just lives his life as a full-grown man who is a full-blown psychopathic sadist, with his past completely erased and his secrets completely buried. So the question still lingers: can someone who kills before they learn to even write truly be free from who they were? To be honest, I don't think so. In this case, I feel like this is pure nature. I feel like he was born with this in him, and I don't know if there's any way out of it. I mean, I hope that psychologists and professionals were able to get through to him, but that's very scary. Very, very scary. But that brings us to our next child, and that is Jasmine Richardson. So before the headlines, before the world would recoil at the idea of a 12-year-old killer, Jasmine Richardson was just a girl, born in 1993 in the city of Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada.